So the book of Haggai is a book that wants us to understand the importance of having priorities, setting up priorities, and ensuring that God has the highest priority. On the first message, he tells them clearly the reason they have not rebuilt the temple is because they are having their priorities wrong. And that's the first message. On the second message, which we see in chapter 2, he promises that if they actually do complete the temple in obedience to God's command, there's a promise of future glory, a promise of the Lord's enabling presence to encourage rebuilding. And then he describes what will happen in the temple. The temple may not look big, but his presence will make it glorious. On the third message, see in chapter 2, we see it in verse 10 to 19, talking about the priestly decision to illustrate the blessings of obedience. That please, as you obey, please understand there are blessings of obedience, clear blessings of obedience, which if you really want to follow the Lord, you are sure to get. It's part of your heritage, and that's an important thing to know, that God does promise that He is going to bless those who obey. We begin at verse 10, which is saying, on the 24th day of the 9th month, in the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. Those days, they did not say 1920, 1930. They referred to the king that was ruling and which year of his rule. They are talking about. That way you know exactly when someone was born or when something happened. So his messages are clear messages. He are historical messages. Each time he wants to give us a message, he tells us exactly when it happened. And this particular message is on the 24th day of the 9th month in the second year of Darius. That's when the word of the Lord comes to Haggai. And I think that's important. The fourth message of the prophecy, because you have seen three more, is given 2 months after the preceding one. That means there has not been a message for 2 months. By giving the date, you can see so the construction is still going on. 2 months later, he gives them, the third message was a message of encouragement and a promise about how glorious the temple will be. This one is still in the same line. And 2 months, I'd wonder how much they had actually done construction. You see, this month is a month in Israel which is around where there is rain. And normally you could be expecting water for the new crops. But we have been told earlier that they were actually having scarcity and disappointment in the period before, that they were doing all they could, putting a lot of effort, but the productivity wasn't good. So now they need to be told that continue farming your gardens. There is hope. Because they would certainly be concerned, do we continue working or do we... Many of us get into that problem when you realize you are working hard, you are not getting any promotion, or you are working hard, nobody appreciates. Sometimes people just drop their tools and they become beggars because they have nothing. There are many people who resign from their jobs not knowing where to go simply because they are unhappy, but there is no productivity, there is no progress. It's not very wise. If nobody is chasing you, it would be better for you to seek from God what else you should be doing, so that by the time you leave, since nobody is chasing you, you leave to something, to do something else. But that really does happen. So he wants to encourage them. During their former period of disobedience, it was understandable why all that effort was not yielding much, because God was against them. Would there be a change now that they obeyed the commands of God and accurate building? This must be the question that the prophet wants them to know, whose answer the prophet wants them to know. Verse 11 says, "This is what the Lord Almighty says. Ask the priest what the Lord says." In other words, if that's what you are wondering about, make it into a question. Find out information. That's sometimes what we don't do when we have had a problem of lack of productivity. We sometimes don't find out. We just give up. We just surrender. We feel frustrated. We feel depressed. So we do nothing. Here, the better thing would be go to a professional. Go to a professional counselor. Go to a psychologist. Go to an economist. Go to a financial advisor. Look for information. So Haggai tells them, continue working. And if what has happened in the past is eating into you, making it difficult for you to be motivated to work, look for information. Because as you do that, looking for the information, you are likely to be better than if you just mandle yourself up with the historical information. The debate is not on whether you have had trouble in the past. The debate is not on whether you have cultivated and you ended up not getting much out of the garden. Those are facts. But now that you know the problem had something to do with God's blessings, you need to go to an expert on how God blesses. And so you go to a priest. And I think that will be something that is important. So you have to seek help from the priests of the day, because they're the ones who understood what God said and how he operated. The priests in Israel were the authoritative teachers of the Mosaic law. They were expected to study it and be experts. Isn't that what we learned from Deuteronomy 17? The priests were commissioned by God to interpret the law. The work of the prophets was different. They were applying the law and challenging people on it. Like Haggai 2 verse 13 to 14 will say, the people of Israel are described indirectly as they had been in their state of disobedience, a condition not to be repeated. So the reason why you are going to a priest is because he's an expert on how God blesses. And you know when he talks to you about the blessings, you know you are talking to an expert. So similarly, instead of spending all your time complaining and talking to people who are complaining like you, and they don't know any better than you, why can't you pull out of the crowd and go to people who are likely to know better? And in the process, you are likely to get an answer that will leave you motivated to continue with the project that you had in mind. And that's an important thing to understand. So, verse 11 is saying, this is what the Lord Almighty is saying. This is God himself telling you, Haggai says, go and ask the priest about the law. They are the ones I give expertise for that. You know, if you're a pastor, your main work is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And you need to understand that so that people know what to come to you for. It is important to understand you are supposed to equip the people, the saints, so that they can go and do the ministry. Don't make it look like you're the only one to do ministry. After all, your job is not to do ministry. Your job is to equip others to do ministry. And that's why we go back to a pastor. So the pastor needs to see his role so that people can come to him. You know, the Muslims have qadi courts where pastors are the ones in charge, people who know the law. Our pastors in the church also know the law of the Lord. So when you have a problem with your wife or with your children, we go to pastors. The only difference is that in Kenya, the pastor will not be paid by the government with our taxes, but the Muslim one will be paid. Yet they are doing exactly the same work, interpreting the law as per their book, holy book. But we are also saying that we also must learn that if we are stuck in a situation that may have something to do with what God says, I think it's good to go to your pastor. And of course, I'm hoping that the pastor is a student of God's word, so that he doesn't tell you what comes off his head. He tells you exactly what the word of God actually says. In verse 12, we see, if a person carries consecrated meat in the fold of his garment, and that fold touches some bread or stew, some wine, oil, or other food, does it become consecrated? The priest answered, no. Then Haggai said, if a person defiled by contact with a dead body touches some of these things, does it become defiled? Yes. The priest replied, it becomes defiled. What a complex legal issue that Haggai is teaching, using. That means if you are carrying meat that is holy, because it's a sacrifice, the questions that are asked, the first is, if a man was carrying holy sacrificial flesh and touch another object with it, would that object by contact with the flesh become holy or set apart to the Lord? And the priest's answer is no. So nothing becomes holy because they touched a holy thing. And that's an important thing to understand. Holiness is not automatic, that if you are near a holy person, you become holy yourself. The answer in this first case is in the negative. Shall it be unclean? Yes. But the second question is a little different. The second question is, if a man who was unclean himself, ceremonially, by reason of contact with the dead body, for example, if he touches an object, would that object become unclean because of the man's ceremonial and uncleanness? The answer to this second question is yes. Very different. Holiness cannot be passed on to others. They must make a decision. But unholiness can actually make a holy person unholy. In other words, sitting near a holy person does not make you holy. But a holy person wanting to associate with unholy people, he may end up himself becoming unholy. What a complex question. The principle is that moral cleanness cannot be transmitted. You cannot become holy because you associate with a moral person. That's what the Mosaic law said. But moral uncleanness can influence or be transmitted to somebody else. That tells you when a holy person keeps the company of immoral people, he himself could easily become unholy. When an unholy person comes to associate with a holy person, it's not automatic. He may not necessarily change. And that's something that we need to have at the back of our mind, even as we deal with issues that are ours. Legal impurity is transmitted rather than legal Levitical purity. A man cannot transmit his health to a sick child, but a sick child can communicate his disease to a man. That's what happens. If you are holy, if you are clean, if you are healthy, other people, even if you touch other people, they don't become holy. But my friend, if you have a contagious disease, then you touch somebody else, it will touch them. A man cannot transmit his health to a sick child. You cannot make somebody whole. You cannot make somebody sick become better because you yourself are healthy. But he himself could make you become unclean. Isn't that one of the things that we keep telling young people? That keeping the wrong company, just like 1 Corinthians chapter 15, that verse 3 says, do not be deceived. Bad company will spoil your good morals. That you holy, associating with unholy people, will not make them holy. But unholy people associating with you will make you unholy. A man cannot transmit health to a sick child. But the sick child could actually make him sick. And that's something that we need to look at and ask. So that's why you need to be very careful who you associate with. Because if you are keeping the company of non-Christians regularly from this imagery, you also may soon discover yourself similar. Somebody who does not trust in God. And it all began by the company you keep. That will be something that we need to be clear about and pray that we are able to practice. Verse 14 says, of Haggai chapter 2, then Haggai said, so it is with these people and this nation in my sight, declares the Lord. Whatever they do and wherever they offer, where there is defiled. In other words, he gives the interpretation. So it is with the Israelites, because that was the nation, declares the Lord, not Haggai, but the Lord. Whatever they do, whatever the Israelites do, and whatever they offer, will actually is already defiled. It's not going to help. Even though the people had been neglecting the work of the temple, they had been offering sacrifices as an private altar at Jerusalem. According to Ezra chapter 3, there was an altar they had built even before they finished their building of the temple. So, here they are offering. These offerings had not been pleasing to the Lord. Therefore, God had withheld his blessing from the people, as we have seen earlier in chapter 1. And that is the critical thing. That which they offer, there is uncleanness, I think, just as the Solomonic unclean Israelites polluted all that they touched, because the Israelites were unholy, so even when they went to sacrifice, it was unholy. So the people in their disobedience transmitted the results of disobedience to the results of that disobedience to their work, which rendered it unprofitable. So it is the fact that if you are unholy, whatever you touch becomes unholy. So even if you are working very hard, there is trouble where you are working, because here he is saying a holy thing does not make an unholy one holy, but an unholy thing, if it touches something holy, it will destroy it, it will make it unholy. And that's something that we need to ask ourselves. That which they offer, in this, even as they are disobeying, but yet sacrificing. By disobeying, that tells you they are immoral. So I think that's very important to see for all of us who give huge amounts in church and want to worship God with a lot of giving, but our heart is in disobedience. That's what these people are being told. You are sacrificing, but you are not disobedient. Your heart is disobedient to God. The people in their disobedience transmitted the results of that disobedience to anything that they did. And it will be important to understand that it means then we have to be careful how we deal with this. As holy flesh do not communicate its consecration to any other object. So similarly, external good works of the people, even the offerings, they were careful to present to God's altar, was useless. Could not suffice to secure blessings from God and the joy of holiness. Doing a good sacrificial thing does not make it holy. If you yourself, the giver, has not repented your sin. You know, they were not to return to their former disobedience course. He is telling them, now that you have chosen to disobey, please don't go back to the disobedience, but forsake it. You know, Haggai is interpreting cause and effect from the angle of the Mosaic law, just as he explained earlier. From the viewpoint of sowing and reaping, the lines are clear between these people, this nation, and the blessings source. And that will be something that we need to deal with. Do not do good and expect it may make you have good relations with God. Your good actions do not bring blessings from God in any way. However good the actions are, the important thing is your heart must be disobedient, must be obedient to God. Then the things you do will also be blessed, will also be in obedience. That's what he wants them to understand, like the Wycliffe Bible commentary says. You know, verse 15 says, now give careful thought to this from this day on. Consider how things were before one stone was laid on another in the Lord's temple. When anyone came to a heap of 20 measures, there were only 10. Then when anyone went to a wine vat to draw 50 measures, there are only 20. You know, I struck all the work, he says, of your hands with the blight, mildew, and hail, yet you did not turn to me, declares the Lord. In other words, keep telling people, God chooses to bless the work of our hands. But then, in this, for them, he had chosen to curse the work of their hands. And that's where the trouble is. We need to understand that working without God's blessings, nothing much will come out of our work. When we talk about getting blessings from God, doesn't mean somebody giving us gifts we have not worked for. It means that what we do, God blesses it. In this one, he is saying, no, I actually cursed the work of your hands because of your heart, disobedient heart. You know, he's now going to that word he uses throughout the book of Haggai. Consider, think through. Don't act without thinking. Consider the difficult circumstances you have gone through. If you consider, you will see it is a curse that you are experiencing. You disobeyed, did not agree to build the temple, and you continued sacrificing, continued working very hard in your gardens, but you could not get any blessings. So that's the message verse 16 is giving. When one came to an heap of 20 measures, it wasn't what he wanted. You know, stringency is important in any endeavor. When a man came to a heap of grain from which he thought to get 20 measures, in other words, if I work on this, it will give me 20 measures. He found that after threshing, they yielded only half of the amount. It was looking a big heap. So that, this can give me 20 measures of wheat. When he finally threshes it out, it becomes less. Oh, you look at your garden and say, from this, I'll be able to get 5 million shillings profit. When finally everything is counted, something went wrong. You have lost the money. The same thing with what they were calling wine vat. That's supposed to yield 50 measures of wine. You are working on your grapes, processing them, juicing them. You know this heap should produce this number of liters. It doesn't work. Expectations were constantly disappointed, for the prospering hand of God was not with them. And I think that's one of the things you need to understand. If you really want God's blessings, you must have a heart that is obedient to him. And he is saying in verse 17, I am the one who smote you. In the days of the prophet Amos, the Lord smote the fields and vineyards of his people with blesting, a result of excessive drought, and with mildew, a consequence of excessive moisture. Either of them will destroy your garden. The remainder of their work, the work of their hands, was destroyed by hail. Rain comes with hail. All nature was arrayed, everything against them. And God is saying, I was the one behind all these destructive things so they could not be productive. And you know what was the issue is? Even when things are going wrong, because you are not considering, you continue doing the wrong thing instead of turning to me. Yet you never turn to me, verse 17 is saying. You see, these tokens of God's displeasure should have been clear enough to warn the people to change. But they didn't. The people were slow to perceive and did not return to God in repentance and trust. And I think it will be important that is understood. You know, verse 18 is saying, from this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundations of the Lord's temple was laid. Give careful thought. Is there any seed left in the barn? Until now, the vine and the fig trees, the pomegranate and the olive tree have not borne fruit. So I think it will be important to understand that you are, and the message we get here is that I intend to bless you, but if you continue in obedience. Let's go back to your earlier days. Didn't you see your disobedience cost you, so that you are working with your hands and not getting blessings? So consider your ways. And as you consider your ways, you will be able to tell, yes, anything I do requires God's blessings. That's why I cannot end up being proud. My hands have gotten this. No. Like he said in Deuteronomy, it is the Lord's blessings that help you to make wealth. You don't make wealth by working hard, although you must work hard. Don't make wealth by learning how to negotiate with people, although it is important to do that. It is that what you are doing is blessed of the Lord. You still must work because you want to bless the work of your hands. But working without blessings will mean you can't get something out of it. But God is saying, yes, without my blessing, you won't go very far. You need to change so that you understand that I bless the work of our hands. So what are we learning? Don't be lazy. Don't sit thinking that you will get things because God has promised to bless you. But number 2, even as you work hard, work in obedience to God. Do not have a heart that is rebellious and work hard expecting to get much out of it. It will be important that you tune your heart to obedience. Allow your heart to turn to God. And in the process, you'll be assured of his blessings. He blesses the work of our hands, is the message of our Haggai. So as you obey him, Work your garden and it will do well. As you obey him, do your business and it will do well.